tend to relate to me in a way that would be improper, because he said that if a man does anything improper towards you, it's because you invited it. So I had to learn how to act in such a way as to not to invite improper behavior. So that would mean like walking often with my head down and my chest pulled in, because I didn't want to flaunt and show myself. That would mean never bending over in the presence of a man for whatever reason. I remember one time I bent over to get my water jugs to pick them up to go to the stream, and there was a couple of brethren there that were studying the Bible. Sometimes people would come out to learn from us, and I got in severe trouble. My brothers could come along and lay their hand on my shoulder, and I would get talked to later about how I was relating to the young men. He didn't say anything to them. It was always me. It was always, if a man does something inappropriate, it's because you invited it. You need to modify your behavior so you don't invite this.
I intend to remember later in our conversation to come back around to some of those factors that your dad was wrestling with, because I think it's really important. I think it's important to say so now that we'll get to that. So you're dealing with a man who, anybody looking on would say, what in the world? And frankly, rightly so. Later on, some information comes to light that gives you a little bit of understanding, probably helps you to reconcile that and be very, very important that you knew that later on. What effect do you think that had on you in your formative years? This stressing that stuff that your dad was all about? It
was very stressful, first of all, to go through it. I always was afraid of when I say not pleasing my father, you have to understand I never had a sense that I could ever please him or that I was pleasing to him. But I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid of doing anything that could get me punished or in trouble. So it was stressful in that way. It was frightening lest I was very afraid of looking bad, of being bad. I wanted so much to be a Proverbs 31 woman. For some reason, I had this weird idea of what that was, so virtuous. And now I read this chapter, and it's all about her being industrious and all these amazing things that was never the focus. It was always that she had this kind of puritanical purity about herself. And that's what I wanted to portray, because I didn't want to be wrong. I already knew I was wrong by being a girl. I didn't want to be more wrong by acting improperly. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking me about,
sure.
But that was what was going on in my mind, the constant fear of doing something that would make me look loose or make me look like a temptress or anything that suggested that I was anything other than absolutely morally pure.
What I find so fascinating about this is that, you read the book is Born Yesterday, and you read those earlier years of your life. People look at that and I would read this, what a nightmare. But I say that keeping in mind sort of the end of the story, the later part of the story. God brought you through that, out of that. You're a tremendously successful professional. So this is a story of redemption. We'll cover more in just a moment. With Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith, I'm John Bradshaw. This is Our Conversation, brought to you by It Is Written. Back with more in just a moment. A woman has a 230 times better chance of conceiving quadruplets than winning the Powerball lottery. But millions of people buy lottery tickets just in case. And why is that? Because, well, you never know. Someone has to win. One of the problems with gambling is that it's everywhere. Whether you're in Las Vegas or Dubai or New York City or here in Melbourne, or in a little out-of-the-way small town somewhere on the fruited plain, there's gambling. And internet gambling. And it's socially acceptable. And it seems as though everyone's doing it. But for every winner, there are millions of losers. And when it comes to gambling, even winners can be losers. Watch now on It Is Written TV. Welcome back to Conversations, brought to you by It Is Written. I'm John Bradshaw, and my guest is Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith. She is the author of her life story, a book entitled Born Yesterday. It's a fascinating read, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to read her book. Dr. Williams-Smith, let's go back. You're a child being raised on the top of a hill. You moved there, and I think you said about 8 years old. You'd been living this peripatetic, vagabond existence, all living in in a small van or a small bus together. As you look back, what are some of the things that you would look back on and say, yeah, these were tough times. These were fascinating things I lived through.
Well, there are some things that stand out in my mind. We were poor. So we started talking about the diet reform, but because of the poverty, it became an impoverished diet. There was a time when we didn't have anything but beans and rice to eat, and then the rice ran out, so we only had beans for a while. There was even one time when the food ran out completely, so my parents told us, go out there and find your food, So we were out there foraging, and it was like March, so there was very little. But we did, so the inside of a slippery elm tree has an inner bark that you can eat, and there are roots that you can eat, and there are also little vegetation, little green type things you can eat. So our meal, we found our meal that day. And I think there was other times we had to kind of forge to supplement our food and be able to eat. So those were some tough times. I think, though, that was brought on more by poverty, but there were some religious extreme elements that came into it. Like when I was 10, we went on a 10-day fast. So that was just water and like broth we could drink. Not even really fruit juice. I think we had just very little of that. Enemas and all of those things, just trying to cleanse the body. And it was kind of really rough on children. My brothers had a lot of growing pains, constant pains in their knees and that, because the diet wasn't, although it was intended to be healthy, it just ended up becoming extreme and impoverished. So that was part of it. Of course, the constant trainings, but the other thing wasn't just so much the trainings, it was being taught to be argumentative. So,
tell me about that.
So, you go to camp meetings and you often see people standing there and they might be shouting that the church is,
this or that.
Babylon and this and that. Well, we had a version of that ourselves. We would go to churches from time to time, and it was our witnessing trips, which was basically about causing trouble. Often end up at the front row of the church, and we all kneel for prayer. So we collect other people that thought like us, and we'd plan this to go. And then so you have a row of people wearing bonnets and long dresses and suspenders, and for every prayer. And we would feel like they would do popcorn prayers just to see if we were going to kneel every time. And of course, you have to remain as true to duty as the needle to the pole, which means every prayer, no matter how short, you have to get up and kneel, right? So and that's what I mean about becoming focused on the rule as opposed to the relationship with Jesus. It wasn't about a relationship anymore at this point. I remember one time a lady invited us to her home to eat, and she fixed a vegan meal because she was trying to really do something that she thought she was sympathetic to us. The minister had been a little rough with us from the pulpit, accused us of being troublemakers and coming there to destroy the flock. And so she felt bad for us and invited us to come back the next week so we could have a vegan meal. That was the first week of camp meeting. So we did come back the next, but we brought our food. We told her she can't ever prepare a meal that we could eat. And she said, but I tried, I think I got it all right. There's no dairy. And she just went through everything that she thought she got right. And, I watched, because we would carry flip charts and everything, books, flip charts, all kinds of materials to support what we believed. And I watched her go through this whole, list of things that she had done right. And then we began to question her. Well, we still can't use your food. Why? Because what kind of oil did you use? Well, it turns out that she didn't use, either safflower oil or olive oil. She used some of the other things, so we can't eat it. Okay, well, if I used the right kind of oil, could you have eaten my food? No, because what kind of salt did you use? Oh. Salt? What are you talking about? Yeah, salt. Show us your salt. She brings out, the box of Morton rock salt. That's the whole thing. So we have a whole study. We actually had flip charts and everything, books to support why you should use sea salt instead of the other. Okay, well, if I had done that, could you have eaten my food? No, we still couldn't have eaten your food. Why? What kind of water did you cook your food in? What water did you use? What in the world? She's exasperated. And it's like, tap water, a whole new set of studies. We trot out flip charts, everything about the dangers of tap water, what's in there, and so forth. And so she finally sits down exhausted and says, okay, if I had gotten the water right and used spring water, could you have eaten my food? Nope, still couldn't have. Why? What kind of pots did you cook your food in? Sure enough, regular Teflon and aluminum pots, and we went through everything explaining why only, stainless steel and the cast iron pots. Well, were we technically right about a lot of things? Probably so.
Sure.
But even in that moment, as a young person, I felt ashamed because I felt like something was out of balance. It was one of the things that began to make me feel like no matter how right we were still wrong. Something was still wrong because here this woman had gone through that, and that was barely even noticed. By the way, she never invited us back again.
No.
You know, that kind of thing. There was the time my brother got horribly burned, and here we are putting aloe vera gel on these deep 3rd-degree burns in his neck. I could see there's like a white tissue, and under it I could see the artery pulsing. It was burned down to that level.
Ooh.
And we're spreading aloe vera gel on it. We obviously didn't know what we were doing. My brother started screaming with that. I mean, he was already screaming in pain. It just got more intense with that. We were using water from an open cistern that flowed off the roof to cleanse try to cool the burns. He should have died. Another thing that let me know in my own behavior that something was wrong with my thinking, I started keeping a chart of how close to perfection I was, because the Bible says, be ye perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect. And we believe this is literal behavioral thought action. For me, sin was about behavior. Mm-hmm. It was about what you say and what you do, what you think, the attitudes you hold. And so to me, if I could just control my behavior, what I said and did, control my thoughts and have the right attitude, I would be sinless. And I was young. I was 15. But by this time I had actually accepted Jesus for my own Savior. And that's a whole other thing right there, how Jesus found me in the middle of that. And he does, because he is relentless in searching for us. But he found me in the middle of this extreme environment and still caused me to be willing to surrender my life to him. So I had done that. But my thinking is still off balance and extreme when it comes to religion and all things related to matters of faith. So I started keeping a chart of how close I came to perfection. And I'd have it up to 95%.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one day I actually hit, and I still have this chart, by the way, at home. I hit it and it's 100%. I put a little star up at the top and everything, just hand-drawn little graft. And I marked 100%. And I wrote in little tiny footnotes, praise God, sinless in every thought, word, and deed for the entire day. Well, I did keep that chart to the end of the month, but I began to feel very, very uncomfortable. Something deep in my spirit was saying, there's something wrong with this. No matter what you think, how could you think you actually got to being sinless? And I believed that could be correct. Based on my understanding of sin and righteousness, it was correct. But I knew something was wrong. I couldn't understand then because my teaching wasn't allowing me to understand that sin is a condition that we're born into and that we cultivate and is propagated through everything in our lives. And you can't just simply by controlling your thoughts and behavior be sinless. I didn't understand that. I didn't think like that. I was so legalistic in everything I did. But what was happening is that underneath, there was this groundswell going on saying to me, there's something about the way you're thinking and living, and there's something about the way you're being raised that is off balance. And I sensed that, I knew that, but I didn't know where to find the truth because I didn't have the right to change anything on my own. I didn't have the freedom to make any. There was a scripture and verse for everything. Our thinking was so black and white and fixed to everything, to the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it's because there's no light in them. And everything, we had a scripture, a verse, a spirit of prophecy quote. There was nothing about what we believed that we couldn't defend in some way. Be ready always to give an answer for the hope that is within you. And so we would argue every point of faith. And yet something's telling me, the Lord is telling me that this is off balance. This is still not me.
It's fascinating that you talk about the family being argumentative, and that verse about giving an answer says, give the answer with meekness.
That's right.
With meekness and fear, the fear of the Lord. So God began to speak to you in the middle of this. You were looking at your family's behavior, your own behavior, and saying, this doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah.
Which is miraculous, I think, that, well, clearly God found a tenderness in your heart, and it's not miraculous that God would speak, but it's wonderful that he does, and miraculous that you heard. So some real changes started to happen. You write that you went off to academy, to high school, to a boarding academy in Canada.
Yeah, well.
How'd that come about?
Well.
And then how'd that impact you?
Yeah, that kind of had a catalyst there. So it's interesting when you have enough conflict and your way of thinking and being is all argumentative based, that can turn inward. So conflict entered the family, and eventually my father just up and left. So I was about 16 when he left. I was 16. And so We went through the winter. That was the really worst winter, the one that my heels froze. And we began to realize, my mom and I, we couldn't do this because he took my older brother, and then my second brother left and went too.
So it's you and your mom on top of the hill?
Yeah. And so as spring comes on, we realized that we can't tend to, you're talking about plowing fields, planting crops, you're talking about chopping wood, splitting logs, you're talking about washing clothes by hand, hauling water, gathering kindling, setting fires, and everything has to be manual and done multiple times a day just to get through a day. So we realized we can't possibly do this. And so we ended up leaving. We asked someone who was going to come visit us that summer anyway, on the Greyhound bus, to send 2 one-way tickets going there. So we ended up going out northwest. But when that happened, you have to remember, when I was 14, that's when I surrendered my life to Jesus. And from the time I was 14, I began to start praying and asking God, help me to understand what I don't know. Show me your heart.
I've got to jump in here because this is a question I planned to ask you. And I think it's a really important point that I think you'll make. You surrendered your life to Jesus, but you write in your book, I didn't know how to surrender to Jesus. They say, give your heart to Jesus. But what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I mean, right there as a kid, you're confronting the most important questions in Christianity.
Yeah, I didn't know.
How do I? So how did you work through that? It's fascinating even that you had the question, because those are the questions that far too many people don't even ask. How do you resolve those questions and come to that place where you started to wrap your mind around how to surrender and how to give your heart?
I didn't have any clear answers. I mean, give your heart to Jesus. What does that mean? Take it out of your heart and hand it to him. How do you do this? But what actually happened in the time frame where I actually ended up surrendering, there was this one verse, 1 John 1:9. If you confess your sins, he is faithful and just to forgive your sins and to cleanse you from all unrighteousness. And that made sense to me.
Yeah.
If I do that, he can change me. And I realized at that point in my life that I was no longer I knew I wasn't in control. I had never been in control, but I was going through a period of feeling extra lonely, like the loneliness was eating me up inside. And I realized I didn't even have the power to change that. So how could I ever change my life? At that point in my life, the biggest dream I could possibly fathom was maybe one day being able to work at Walmart. And that's because there was a Mennonite girl living a few miles down the road who had gotten a job at Walmart. And I found out about her, and that was my big dream. And so I'm like, I can't even make that come to pass. This is the way my life is always going to be. I don't know how to change that. And I began to pray and ended up surrendering. I found some quotes in Ellen White's writing, messages to young people. Dear youth, do you have aspirations and dreams that one day you may stand at the summit of intellectual greatness and even enact laws to change for our nation? You may, every one of you, have your wish. Just keep God first. And I'm trying to think, how could I do that if going to school is wrong? How can I do that if I have no education? How can I do that standing in a bonnet and a long dress? How can I do that when I can't talk or relate to anybody because I don't have relationships, first of all, and I don't know how to do it outside the context of religion? So I began to turn to the only one I could. And so when my father left and we ended up leaving the property, I knew I was leaving to go to school. Why? Because I've been asking him to make it possible, make the impossible possible. And he did. And so I left. I was just thrilled. I knew things were going to change. And that became the foundation. Leaving put me in a place where it was actually Fountain View, where I ended up. Fountain View Academy, it's called now. It was Fountain View Farms. And I ended up there, and I ran into someone who understood my legalistic, black and white, very rigid thinking, and was able to help me through that and help me to understand other ways of thinking. Simple concept, principles. I had never learned principles. I had only learned laws and rules. But the concept of principles helped me to realize that I could change things that were wrong without throwing everything away.
Was that a rough transition for you, or was it just a welcome transition? I mean, confronting a new reality, even if it's a wonderful reality, even if it's a positive development, can be jarring. Was it jarring, or was
absolutely.
it pretty smooth? It was jarring.
What I had believed, I believed with all my heart, all my life. And so, to realize that so many fundamental things about what I believed was wrong was very jarring. It was destabilizing and everything. It was also welcome because something in my spirit had been telling me things were wrong, and I couldn't figure out how to determine what could possibly be wrong. So take the principle of modesty and dress. I thought Ellen White says that the small bonnet exposing the face and head show a lack of modesty. So she's referring to the little bonnet that, you see on the little cap in the back of the head.
Sure.
So that was our reason for wearing the big brim bonnets. Well, now I'm learning that modesty changes, like how modesty is expressed doesn't have to stay the same over the course of centuries, right? There was a time when being modest meant wearing a veil.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the 19th century it was wearing a bonnet. Now it might be, when it comes to head, just doing your hair in a decent, simple, pleasant manner. But the principle is that what you wear should frame your character for people to see Jesus. It should not detract and derail them to your body so that they are distracted from Jesus. I learned that once I understood that, it made so much sense. I realized, okay, there's a lot of things that I can do and still be within modesty, within the realms of modesty, if that's the guiding key. But to realize it's also difficult, too, to get away from black and white thinking because
Sure.
It's very simple.
Yeah, it is.
It's simple, extinct. You don't have to think for yourself.
Doesn't require
it's just
a lot
kind of,
of
what does it
anything.
say? You do it, right? There's
Yep.
no interpretation. There's no critical thinking. There's no room for the Holy Spirit to need to talk to you
That's right.
because you don't have to pray about what you already know. It's written in black and white. It's right there.
There's no need for nuance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's right
all good.
there. And it fits everybody. It coats everybody. We all know what to do.
Yeah, yeah. You went to school. That wasn't the end. It's really interesting. You wondered if one day you might be able to achieve working at Walmart, which
Yeah.
is fascinating. No one would suggest there's anything wrong with working at Walmart. Thank God people work at Walmart, and that's all good. But you've gone on to become a PhD and run a journalism department at a private university, and you've done great things, and one would assume there's plenty more great in the pipeline. So let's talk about transitioning through that. You got out of school, you started to pursue further studies, and it wasn't all plain sailing. We've got about a minute. So talk to me about your thinking as you really started to step out into this bold new world.
I was afraid at times. So, you make a change, but then you become afraid over time that you're going too far. So I end
Okay.
up going to college,
Yeah.
but then I'm afraid I find myself very successful academically after I finally got over some major mountains of learning. It was not easy at first. And then I began to realize academics is my thing. I can succeed, but then I'm afraid of going too far. Mm-hmm. Because somehow what you're raised with, especially if it's this black and white simplistic thinking, represents itself as always being right. And so I found that you could take a person out the wilderness, but you can't necessarily take the wilderness out of the person.
Fascinating. Well, there's more to cover. You do a great job of telling the story in your book. The book is called Born Yesterday, and it's certainly worth reading. I hope you'll do so. Her name is Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith. I'm John Bradshaw. We will have more from our conversation just a moment.
More and more people are watching It Is Written TV. They're watching their favorite It Is Written programs, listening to inspiring sermon series, and much more. They're watching them here, and even here. See for yourself why people are turning to It Is Written TV to watch their favorite Christian programs live and on demand. Watch It Is Written TV for free anytime on Roku, Apple TV, and at itiswritten.tv.
Welcome back to Conversations, brought to you by It Is Written. My guest is Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith. So, raised in an extreme environment, God spoke to your heart. He was clearly with you, but there's just a lot of stuff there. You find yourself in academy, a high school, boarding high school, far from home. And before we know it, you are an adult in the world pursuing an education. Life is on an altogether different trajectory. Now, something I want to ask about is this. You are quite open in your book that some of the personal choices you made in your life weren't always the best, and certainly didn't reflect some of the ideas that you were raised with in terms of right and wrong. But it's a really interesting dynamic when you stop and think about the relationship you had or didn't have with your dad. How do you see the connection there? Clearly there was something missing in your life. you never had a daddy whose arms you could run into. Talk about that.
I've always had a void in my life. It was there to where I didn't think of it as a void. But whatever it is that little girls felt for their daddies, I never felt that. I felt nothing but fear. And I know that when I was in college, I began to long consciously for a father. It was there before, but I felt it more in college. And of course, eventually thinking, well, I'll get married, which I ended up doing, not, I think, for that reason, but for many other reasons too. Mainly, I was trying to hold on to what was right. So I found someone that reminded me of how I was raised, but in a more positive way. So trying to hold on to that. Well, that didn't last. And then I'm finding myself a single mom with 2 children and this gaping needs inside. I mean, I used to feel such gaping pain inside. I remember just trying to do a simple task like washing dishes. It was just like an envelope of pain would just wash over me. Simple task. Just, I don't know why. I can't explain that. I could just tell you at times it could be triggered by certain things like doing a household task, but it was something I always lived with, but sometimes it would become overwhelming where I couldn't even do that. Sometimes I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep in my own bed. Just this deep craving, overwhelming need for something that I didn't understand. And so I think I was always looking for a daddy. I was always looking for a father figure. Part of my problem was I knew that I wasn't going to do the wrong thing. I knew I wanted to do the right thing. And my record of I've never done this and I've never done that and I've never done the other. Because when I got married, that was the first guy I kissed. That was the first guy I dated. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then I'm sheltered in marriage. So I think that helped me to be more, I was naive about how human beings and life can work, how nature can work. And so, of course, I began to get some lessons. Then that's affecting me and making me feel afraid and vulnerable and whatever. I go through a lot. I'm not justifying in any way the wrongs that I made, but I can say that in reaching for that father figure, I got more than the father figure.
Well, I think it speaks to something. So you're raised in this extreme environment. You had a lot to unlearn, an awful lot to learn, and you couldn't possibly know what you didn't know. You didn't know what it was you needed to know. Only life and sometimes the bumps you go through and experience can lead you to the place where you go, oh, okay, so that's a lesson learned. Life doesn't come with well, one could say the Bible, but if you have a certain view of the Bible, life doesn't come with a manual, a how-to, and some of that is learned through difficult experience.
Yeah, I think when you're a teenager, you're a younger early adolescent, teenager, you can make mistakes, and there's some room for learning from that.
Yeah.
When you're in your late 20s and 30s, I think I was in my late 20s and early 30s. There's not so much room for mistakes. And what I like to focus on in this is but God, because He never, even your mistakes, He uses them He never wants you to do those things. It's never condoned for you to do those things. But in the midst of your very mistakes, He can transform that into something by which He can reach you and save you. And so I was receiving some of the love or the affection that I longed for, but He brought me to the place where I realized I don't want it like this. Like, I want what I can be proud of, that I don't have to hide. I don't want to be ashamed of. I don't want to be scared to death that someone might find out about it. I want the kind of love and affection that I can have with my head up and my eyes open and everyone knowing, and who cares what anyone thinks. And so what happens when God says don't do something, we can take that as a label, as a command, and say, okay, I'm going to obey it because you said I have to do it. What God is trying to get us to do is we realize that you don't want to do this because I have something so much better for you to live differently, even if it comes with the lack of something you think you want. You realize it's so much better for you than taking a compromise. But in the midst of what I was going through, God reached out to me directly and let me know that I love you. I want you to know that I love you. And I had always known that Jesus loves me when I'm good, right? My upbringing had taught me that. Like, if I could get it right, if I could get through a day or a week without making mistakes, modesty mistakes, I never earned my Father's smile, but maybe he wouldn't be reproving either. So I could almost feel like he was satisfied, right? But I'm not learning that Jesus loves me when I'm bad, because I see that scowl. I hear that harsh tone. I get that punishment, right? And in the midst of me making mistakes, I'm talking about in the midst of me making mistakes and doing things that I'm not supposed to do. That's when God directly reached out to me and spoke to my heart and said, I just want you to know that I love you. Mm. Pastor Bradshaw, that transformed my life. That changed me from I started out being law-based, and there was a shift to being principle-based. And I think there's always a place for laws and rules, and there's this huge place for principles. And I use principles for all my life to guide me now, loving my parents, choosing to have a relationship with my father, even when I didn't feel it. Principles guiding my life. I don't regret having that, but what I needed was something more. I needed the deep heart relationship with God, being able to know that he loved me, that he's not sitting there waiting to condemn me. Doesn't mean he's condoning the wrong that I do, but it means that doesn't define who I am to him.
This incredible transformation took place. I want to ask you about your relationship later with your dad, but I'll do that in just 1 second. You were forbidden to go to school.
Yes.
And the education you got was on a mountaintop someplace, a mile from your nearest neighbor and more miles from the nearest people outside your neighbors. Today you have 2 doctoral degrees, a PhD and a doctor of education. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's an incredible growth. That's an incredible development. So somehow God has brought you from there to here, indicating that miracles really do happen. Talk to me about your father. Later on, you had something of a relationship with him, but I was really interested in your book. You know, I'm reading about your dad, and I'm scratching my head. I'm going, no, there's something here. There's something here. I bet you. And later on, you bring it out in the book, and I knew it.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk to me as much as you can about a little of that, because I think it's important to explain some of what was really going on in your dad's life and experience that kind of drove him to be the way he was. We're not seeking to exonerate him. It's not about any of that. But what did you learn about your father, and how did that impact you?
Sure. Well, there's two points of revelation, and one happened a little earlier, where my father ended up helping me to understand why he had always been so severe and cold toward me. He had made some mistakes when I was too little to remember. They weren't the worst mistakes that could happen, but they were definitely brushing the edges, and he recognized it himself. And he became very afraid of doing the wrong thing, of ever hurting his daughter. So his way of treating me was to push me to the edges. The way I interpreted was that I was wrong and that I was bad. But I didn't know he was trying to protect me from things that he didn't understand how to deal with. Mm-hmm. So that was a major revelation to realize what had been going on with my father. Then, toward the end of his life, 2 years before he passed, he had a heart attack, and he ended up deprived of oxygen, which caused brain damage. So they brought him around, but then he has brain damage. So he couldn't walk and feed himself, and he couldn't really talk as well as he wanted to. And when they did the whole diagnostic things with him, I learned things that I didn't know. So for one, he had PTSD, which wasn't surprising. I did know that.
Sure.
But I learned he also had touches of schizophrenia. And I didn't know that. And then, probably the most surprising of all was to discover he actually had a brain tumor. And see, we don't know how we're affected physically with what's going on inside of our bodies.
Right.
And what the doctor told me is, he said that brain tumor could have been there for a very long time.
Right.
It could have been affecting his behavior for a long time. You'd have no way of knowing. He said, but that brain tumor is not something new. That's been there for a long time. So that was amazing to discover this. So sometimes you judge people and you don't really realize what they're dealing with, and they don't know either. That's why the Bible says, judge not, and you shall not be judged, because you never know what you're judging.
That's right.
And I'm so thankful that when I learned that about my father, it was also after years of having chosen to love him anyway. But I didn't have any emotional connection to him. What happened was, once he fell sick like this, I realized that I loved my father and I wanted to take care of him. And I begged God to spare his life so that I could care for him a while and let him know that I loved him. And God did. He spared his life until I realized this is selfish. He's suffering. He doesn't want to live like this. And I told God, well, don't keep him for my sake, just so that I can show him that I love him. I don't know why. I just really wanted to do that. I wanted him to know. I guess I realized that he also grew up without love too.
Sure.
And he needed it, and I wanted to bathe him in that. But I couldn't. I couldn't give him what he needed. And so finally I told the Lord, don't hold him for me. And my father passed on within 3 months of me making that prayer.
Not allowed to go to school. You earned a doctorate twice. You're raised with no media, and you're the dean of a journalism school, a journalism department at a university, journalism and communication. I mean, come on.
Ironic, huh?
Yeah, maybe God has a sense of humor. I
think
don't know.
He does.
You experience some bumps along the way. You're ludicrously happily married to a wonderful human being. I wonder if this puts you in a place where you have a real empathy now for people who might be sort of where you were years ago, families where your families were.
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever want to rush up to people and say, look, I could help you? Do you ever get the opportunity to minister to people and explain to them, share a little bit of your story? I know your book would do that.
Yes. Probably one of the ways that I'm able to do that most is through the book, and also talks like these. Because you find people with thought extremism everywhere. Not
That's
everyone
right.
has lifestyle extremism like we did.
Yeah.
But my case takes what is actually far more common than you may realize and puts it in such strong relief that you're able to see things about this that is common by virtue of what is not so common. What I find, especially talking in churches and things like that, you always have pockets of people like that. And just like with myself, there's that disturbing feeling that something's not right. They're not going to admit it. They're not going to talk about it, but you find they're fascinated with a story like this. They want to hear that. You cannot help a person who's trapped in extremism and legalism by arguing with them.
Right.
You can't. All you can do is have a relationship with them, because there may be a time that they want to talk to somebody. And if you've always been understanding, if you've never made fun of them, if you've always shown care for them, then you might be the person they turn to. I've had people come to me like, I need to talk to you. I've never told anybody this, but this is how I was raised, or this is what my family is like, and I don't know what to do about it. And I can't tell them the path out, but I can tell them what God did for me and tell them there is hope to break away from this. That you don't have to throw away everything just to find the center in Jesus. Like, the center is right there, but you need to focus on Jesus, and he will bring your life into balance. He will help you to understand. But there are things you have to do that can also help. I was about to go into a teaching mode. I don't want to run ahead. I want to talk about things you can do.
No, you're okay. We've only got a couple of minutes anyway.
Well, one of the things I found, for example, and I don't mean to bring any doctrinal controversies up here, but I was raised on King James only, right? Well, when I would read this, the same patterns by which I learned these scriptures will pop into my mind. You think about it, you can read, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. But what are you hearing? Are you hearing, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life? Or are you hearing, for God so loved the world?
Yeah, two very different renderings of the same verse.
Same word.
Yeah.
But the recording in your head is very different.
Yeah.
What is it? What spirit? What attitude? What mode is it coming out of? So I chose to change to a different translation so that I could hear it, the words that God was speaking. And that was so important. There was a point where go ahead.
I want to ask you this. Maybe this is all we got time for. Let's see. Talk to me about who God is to you now. Who is God for Rachel today? When you're a kid and the only picture you get of God as the one transmitted to you via your parents, and things are harsh and exacting and difficult and severe. Maybe you start to see God being a little bit like that. I don't know. Who do you see God as being in your life and experience today?
So, to be honest with you, the default is always to see him as severe. That is the default. Bible talks about by the renewing of your mind.
Sure.
Be changed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah.
God has to work with my thinking to help me realize he is not what I by default think he is. So I by default stay away from him. I by default want to hide myself from him, just like Adam did. But I have to remember God is my very present help in trouble. God is the one who hears. He is the one who cares. He is the one who knows. He has the heart of a father. And even though I can't go back to my birth father to know what that feels like,
Dr. Hill has been a minister of the gospel, a teacher, and a university professor. Dr. Hill has been a teacher, a principal, and a university professor. Together, their lives have recently taken a very different turn. He is Dr. Roland Hill, she is Dr. Susie Hill, and this is our conversation. Dr. Hill, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
We're excited about being here, sir.
You have lived more full lives and accomplished more than many people would ever hope to or dream to. Yet recently, things have ramped up. You're now the directors of United Prison Ministries International, and I would like you to tell me as much as you possibly can about what you're doing right now. What's UPMI?
United Prison Ministries International is a nonprofit organization committed to working with prisoners behind bars and ex-offenders when they get out. We've been doing this for over 40 years, and we've been blessed to be working with prisoners in about 4,000 prisons in the United States, and we send materials to 72 countries in the world. So it's exciting.
Prison ministry is powerful. There'll be people watching right now who know firsthand, but at the same time, others who know precious little or maybe nothing at all about prison ministry. Let's talk about that in a moment. First, let's talk about you. Take me back to the beginning, wherever the beginning was. Let's start with you, Dr. Hill.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. We're so glad to be here today to share our passion for United Prison Ministries and the work that we're doing. I was born in Honduras. I'm a native of San Pedro Sula, and I grew up there for the first 8 years of my life. So Spanish is my native language. I speak fluent Spanish. When we came to this country, I actually had an experience where our teachers told our parents we should forget Spanish and learn English. And they listened to the teachers, but God gave me Spanish as my gift. So I am so glad that I'm able to speak, preach, teach, and even have a book written in Spanish.
Fantastic.
But my husband and I met at Oakwood College. We were married in 1975. We were celebrating 47 years of marriage. So he pastored and I worked with him in ministry. I always saw us as one in ministry. We got married, we had 2 children. I stayed home with our children until they entered first grade, and then continued to just work alongside my husband in ministry until he retired. And now we are living in Huntsville, Alabama. We thought we were going to be retired.
We thought so.
Yeah. God had different plans, didn't he?
Yeah, but I did. I got a chance to teach. I became a Spanish teacher. That's when I really learned the constructs of my language. And then I also taught at the university and was able to help students learn about families and how, the family works. And it was just exciting to be able to help them shape and to make decisions for their lives when it comes to their future in relationship to marriage, in relationship to parenting. And it was just exciting for me. I loved it.
And you picked up a PhD along the way. Tell me a little about that.
Well, I actually never really had that as one of my goals in life. My husband was the one who was telling me
That's correct.
that I should get a terminal degree. And I said, that's your dream. That's not my dream. And I did wake up one morning early, and I told my husband, I think I want to get my PhD. He said, you do? And he went upstairs in the office, came down in 30 minutes with a printout. And the printout said, This is what you're going to get your PhD in, and this is where you're going to get it. And I looked at it. It intrigued me. I said, honey, I like this. I love the family. Get a degree in family studies. That's just where I'm at. So that was Sunday morning. On Tuesday, we went to Texas Women's University. And on Friday of that same week, I was enrolled in the PhD program, and I finished it.
And what perfect preparation for what you're doing now. Dr. Olwen Hill, take me back a little ways to where you sprang from, and I'm very interested in learning about your call to and your entrance into pastoral ministry.
I'm a preacher's kid, all right? My father spent 48 years in the pastorate, and he was one of those good, solid pastors who lived a Christian life before us. And when I was 6 years old, he was preaching, made an appeal. I walked down the aisle, gave my heart to Christ, and accepted my call to the ministry.
So from a child?
From 6 years old.
You knew?
I knew. I've never veered from that at all. When I was coming through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, I knew I was called to be a pastor, and that's all I've ever wanted to do. Now, there have been some roads that have taken me through specialized ministry and pastoral ministry. But I'm a pastor at heart. That's what I was called to do. So I went off to Oakwood, finished up the degree there at Oakwood University now, and then I went on and did an MDiv at Andrews University. And then I followed God's calling to finish a D-Min with a concentration in something that I wrote called theoeconomics, the economy of God. As a pastor, I saw that many of my members were struggling with financial issues, and especially from a theological standpoint. And so I committed myself to learn all I could from the Word of God about how to help empower my people economically. And I ended up writing several books on that area because I'm committed to empowering people. I believe, John, that theological enlightenment brings economic empowerment. And I saw it as I crafted out this new economic philosophy called theoeconomics or theoeconomism.
Fantastic. Well, somewhere along the line, there was a transition to prison ministry. Now, is this something that had been percolating away in the background for years? Or was
Absolutely
this
not.
New?
Absolutely not.
Tell me how it came about.
When I was teaching at Southwestern Adventist University, there was a gentleman that would come around my office and said, Dr. Hill, please help me out at the prison. And I found all excuses not to go. And one day, I was in my devotion and I said, God, I want to reach black men. And God says they're in prison. Within a matter of an hour or so, this guy calls me and he says, Dr. Hill, I was impressed to call you. Can you please come and help us out at the prison and teach theoeconomics? Of course, I couldn't refuse him. God had spoken. So I went and taught at the prison theoeconomics for 6 weeks. And the guys just loved it. They saw an economic philosophy that would help them to go on the right path when they got out of prison. But my problem, John, is then when I finished the 6 weeks, the burden left. And I got busy traveling the world. My wife and I do presentations on family and finance. And so we've done a lot of them around the world. And so I got busy doing that while I was teaching full time. And it was not until I was retired and at the church that we attend, they were having prison ministry day. And I told Susie, I'm not going. And because she is a woman of God, she says, we're going.
Honey, we need to go. We need to go to church.
So you tell me why you were dead set against going. You knew that this is going to get you involved in something, didn't you?
Well, there were a couple of things. The first thing is that when you talk about prison ministry, who gets excited about it? And then secondly, that's not something that I saw myself doing, especially in retirement. But when I got to church and the guy started preaching, the Spirit of the living God started moving in my heart. Tears started coming down. And then God says, now, I'm bringing back what I gave you 25 years earlier. You must do it. And after the guy got through preaching, I'd already made my commitment, but it was sealed because the brother that he brought up to testify This is what clinched it for me. I was his resident assistant, his RA at Oakwood his freshman year. I hadn't seen him in 40 years. And he tells this story that he had been in prison for 20 years. And it just blew my mind. This is a good guy. And so we talked after service. And God says, now it's time for you to go to work in the prison ministry. So I started looking around, seeing how I could do it myself personally. And then I ran into UPMI International. And the Lord said, you need to call. I called. And Natalie, of course, you know Natalie, you've talked to her on the phone.
Yes.
She runs the organization. She's our COO of the organization. And they've been looking for leadership for about 10 years. And she told me after the organization asked my wife and I to lead it, when you call, Roland, I knew it was God's answer to our prayer. I just didn't want to tell you on the first phone call. So that's how we got involved.
So what was it like entering into this ministry leadership, a ministry with a rich history, a broad reach, and profoundly important? I imagine this was like diving in the deep end.
But you know how
Real
God
deep.
works. God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform.
Yes.
We knew the leadership that we're following. We know Natalie, we went to the same church. When I was a girl, they sat on the left side of the church. I would go and sit on the right side. I saw her when she was a girl, her mom and her other siblings. And we knew the founding fathers originally before they even thought about prison ministries themselves. So we have a deep history. She remembers me and I remember. We're like family. Mm-hmm. So that made it easier for us when we came together to talk about working at United Prison Ministries. And they have done an exceptional job. The foundation is so solid. Mm-hmm. They built a solid foundation. Started in 1981 with United Prison Ministries International and have continued to work giving materials and printing materials for prisoners.
No, what excited us, John, and me particularly, when I looked at what I was called to do, it fit into everything that I've been trained to do: writing, preaching, evangelism, and being a pastor behind bars, because ultimately that's what I am. I'm a pastor. So I said, now this gives me an opportunity to share, pardon the pun, with a captive audience.
Captive audience. That's right.
And let me tell you, John, I've been going into the prisons recently, and I just have been enthralled and excited to watch these men hear the word of God and moved by the Spirit of God to change lives.
Tell me a little about some of the specifics that UPMI gets involved in prison ministry, in ministering to inmates.
Well, there are 4 things that we are actually committed to do at United Prison Ministries International. The first thing is we're committed to distributing Christian materials in the area of self-reliance, self-development, and spirituality. So we've been doing that well over the last 40 years. We've distributed over 78 million, I said million, pieces of literature.
That's a lot.
In prisons in America and all over the world, okay? Then the second thing we do is we develop materials for prisoners. Because when we go inside, one of the things that we've discovered is you can bring them to Christ, but you have to take them beyond that. And so we're developing materials that's particularly designed to stop recidivism, because there's a revolving door.
Sure.
They keep coming back each time. And we're committed to developing materials to help them when they get back out, and the word is back in the free world, that they can stay. Mm-hmm. Then the third thing we do is we partner with organizations that allow the guys, when they get out, to find stabilization, like people who provide transitional housing. Some of them have addictions. So we work with organizations to help that. And then the fourth thing we do is we train churches on how to do prison ministry. Because oftentimes people go into prisons and they have a preconceived idea what the prisoner is. Like I was talking to someone yesterday and they were saying, well, Dr. Hill, the prisoners they're not that smart. I said, you haven't been in the prison, because some of the smartest men in the world are behind bars. Mm-hmm. And they're looking for mentoring to take their gifts and talents and turn them into something positive.
What I find fascinating about this is not any kind of a Band-Aid solution. This is a very comprehensive approach addressing an entire person, that individual's needs, not just while they're inside, but you're looking forward to transitioning people successfully from behind bars to life, as you said, in the free world.
Well, see, we speak on behalf of the 2.2 million men and women behind bars and the 5.2 million that are ex-offenders. And so we get very passionate because who becomes their voice? Who really tells the world what it's like to be behind the bars? So we go in, spend time with them. We, again, prepare materials that help to transition them because many of them are going to get out. In fact, statistics tells us that there are over 600,000 prisoners released every single year. And the interesting thing, John, between 3 to 5 years, 77% of them return back to jail.
That's just a huge number.
That's staggering, isn't it?
It tells us there's something really broken in society and maybe even in that system.
Yeah, it's really hard because just last year, just to give you a personal story, just last year, an individual whom we actually ministered to behind bars, received materials from UPMI, was released after being in prison for 20 years.
Well.
And then they dropped him off at a corner somewhere, and he had to figure out what to do after that. All he had was money in his pocket to maybe catch a bus somewhere, and it wasn't enough to do anything. And now we as a ministry have garnered our resources around him and helped him get back into society, functioning, finding him a job. We have an individual who has actually provided him work every day that he can use and start earning money. We also helped him get his, because he's a veteran, so he's able to get housing through the Veterans Administration.
But without your help, none of that would have happened.
None of that would have happened.
And you got to ask yourself.
He was actually sleeping on the streets.
You got to ask yourself about a system. You incarcerate somebody for 20-odd years and drop them off on a street corner. You might as well not even let him out. It's just an invitation to come back in a week or a month.
He's going to go back.
In fact, they told him, "Oh, you'll be back." The guys at the were keeping would say, "You'll be back." Every time he passed him, "Oh, you'll be back." That's what he said to him. And he says, "Oh, no." And we were just blessed to be able to be there for him and continuing to provide the support that he needs.
Yeah, thank God he will not be back.
No.
Because God stepped in through United Prison Ministries International, and God is doing that again and again and again. We'll hear more about this in just a moment with Dr. Roland Hill and Dr. Susie Hill. I'm John Bradshaw. This is Our Conversation.
There are some things you don't want to forget. And there are some things God specifically tells us to remember. At the dawn of time, the Creator of the universe gifted to the human family a divine prescription for combating stress, busyness, and the pressures of daily life. A regular blessing of time spent in the heart of God. Don't miss A Day to Remember. We'll travel to the largest 10 commandments in the world and rediscover heaven's purpose for your life. A Day to Remember. A personal God seeking a meaningful connection with His children. A way forward for spiritual renewal. We'll open the Bible together and learn that God has blessings for His children that are being overlooked and neglected. Get more from God. Go deeper in your faith. A Day to Remember. Watch now on It Is Written TV.
Thursday, August the 5th, 2010 was not a happy day for 33 men when a collapse in a mine in Chile buried them 2,300 feet below ground. No matter how much they tried to escape, there was no way out. Rescue would have to come from above. On the outskirts of the San Jose mine, over 2,500 people gathered. And with each failed rescue attempt, despair increased. And families gathered together to pray for a miracle. From the Atacama Desert comes a story of tragedy, a story of uncertainty, yet a story of courage, hope, and ultimately a story of salvation. Wait on the Lord, and the miracle will come.
Camp Hope. Watch now on It Is Written TV.
Welcome back to Conversations. My guests are Dr. Susie Hill and Dr. Roland Hill. They are the directors of United Prison Ministries International, an organization with a rich history of ministering to people behind bars, and not only that, enabling people to transition to a successful life in the free world, and very frequently a life lived in the heart of Jesus. Doctors Hill, let's talk about some of the many prison ministry success stories. Now, I was fortunate to pastor a congregation, and this congregation provided really the backbone for a thriving prison ministries ministry, really, organization. The miracles we saw. Now, people can tend to be a little cynical
Right.
About prisoners, and people can be a little dismissive about prisoners. Why we would, I don't know, because this country has a gigantic prison population. There are few families that have not been impacted by the prison system in some way. We would surely want to see redemption for all. And it sounds to me that that's really in the DNA of United Prison Ministries International. Redemption for a major population that has the odds stacked against it. Let's talk about some of the miracles, some of the success stories, some of the incredible things you've seen through prison ministry.
You know, I mentioned to you, John, about this guy that kind of sealed my involvement in prison ministry. Well, I actually began to mentor him and encouraged and inspired him to start his own nonprofit organization because he's very interested in providing transitional housing. You know, he's one of the guys, after 20 years in prison, they give him a bag of cookies and send him on his way, and he didn't have a place to stay.
Yeah, these guys are set up to fail. Set up to fail.
So he comes out, and he goes to one transitional house that eventually closes down. So he said, I'm going to start my own. I walked him through, helped him get his nonprofit organization. So now he's a tax-exempt nonprofit organization, and he has 4 men in his transitional house right now.
Thank God.
And he's such a positive man. And remember now, he spent 20 years behind bars.
Yeah.
But he's so positive. And one of the reasons why is he has purpose in life. And that's what we do with United Prison Ministries International. We're concerned with helping men find purpose in life. One of the programs that we're launching this year is called PREP, Prison Economic Reform Educational Program. It's a 3-course curriculum designed to help men while they're in prison change their philosophy and their theology so that they become self-reliant. One of the courses teaches them what biblical success is all about. Another course teaches them how to steward their life, because most of them are there because they've never learned how to manage their life. And then the last course teaches them financial literacy, and it teaches them how to run and operate their own businesses.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yes.
because that's the thing that's really hard. When they come out, like you said, the odds are stacked against them. They can't get jobs. They're felons. They can't even rent an apartment.
Right.
And who's going to hire them? When they find out that they are ex-felons, they usually lose their jobs. So it's nice to know that while they're behind bars, we're giving them an opportunity to think in terms of being the job, of owning and operating their own business, using their skills. Whatever skill, everybody has been given a gift by God. So we help the prisoners learn and identify their gift, find a need in society, and fill that need inside of their gift. That's a job nobody can take from you.
Right.
We call them Godpreneurs because we believe the call to Christ is not simply to the kingdom of God, but as a worker to produce in the kingdom of God. And there's a difference between an entrepreneur and a Godpreneur. These men and women that we train through our PREP project, Prison Economic Reform Educational Program, they are committed Christians who are committed to use their God-given talents in a business that will produce for the kingdom of God.
Now, tell me how you go about not so much constructing a program like that, but getting that, facilitating that inside prisons. That does not sound like a simple thing, but I mean, United Prison Ministries International has 40 years experience.
Well, that's the great thing about